Washington is always busy when a new president is made. It was coaches and teams then. Automobiles hadn't yet been given the official recognition. Prosperity was the issue then, too. McKinley served his country well and died a martyr, the third president to be assassinated.
Hello everyone. That was a news clip from around 100 years ago, looking back to the assassination of President William McKinley. I covered McKinley's murder in the Energy of Empire series, and tried to ascertain whether there was a deeper story behind the actions of the famous Lone Nut. This assassination hasn't attracted anything like the critical attention later ones would receive, and while suspicious, I came up blank. That was until I discovered the work of today's guest, Professor John Koerner. In his book, The Secret Plot to Kill McKinley, Professor Koerner peels back the layers to reveal a wider anarchist, and perhaps ultimately Republican Party plot to dispense with the United States' 25th president. That's what he explains in this interview. I start out by asking him what drew him to investigate this event, which took place at such a pivotal time in American history.
I grew up in Buffalo, and it's always been sort of on my mind, being a Buffalonian. This assassination is such an ingrained part of our story here in Buffalo. The McKinley Monument is in the center of Niagara Square, and growing up as a history nut, now I'm a professor of history at Erie Community College, it's always been sort of the central story of our Buffalo history, the McKinley assassination. And the History Museum, where I visited as a kid with my grandparents and parents, is the remaining building from the exposition where he visited. So it always had been like on my mind, sort of what this story was, and I wanted to sort of find out more about it. And as I kept digging deeper, I found out there is so much more to the story that's never really been told, that points to maybe even two different plots that could have been behind who was attempting to kill our 25th president.
Okay, maybe we can back up from there for a moment, as a lot of people perceive William McKinley's presidency as being pivotal, as it's where the United States makes its step into overseas empire or overseas colonies. Would you agree with that? And if so, could you lay out what you think is important specifically about this era of American history?
Right. So President McKinley, when he takes office, it's very controversial because he was running against William Jennings Bryan, and there was a lot of voter suppression. And the idea was if you voted for McKinley, you could keep your job because he was kind of the puppet of Rockefeller, Morgan, and Carnegie, who had funded his campaign and threatened workers if they voted for Bryan, they'd lose their jobs. So he gets into office kind of in a very unusual way. But then he has so much wealth and power behind him that he's able to, I think, use that and get a second term in 1900. And the war, the Spanish-American War is, again, as you said, this pivotal moment where a country enters the world as an empire, wins the war in about 3 months and gets all this new land. And it's like entering at the world stage. And he is the president at the time. And it makes him a very beloved president among many people. But he's still not liked among the working class because they view him as almost like a president who doesn't understand their needs. He is a president who breaks up strikes and is pro-gold and pro-tariff, things the working class just does not really like. And he's still, at that point in his presidency, he's definitely a popular president among some people, but not among everyone. And that's, I think, what led to his assassination.
I've heard it said that people didn't really ever know what McKinley was thinking, unlike a Theodore Roosevelt, where everyone knew what he was thinking, and he was for empire and for expansion. McKinley seemed to go where the political winds were blowing more and wasn't really sure whether he was going to go and colonize the Philippines or not for a while. Would that be your assessment, or do you disagree with that?
No, I think that's a fair assessment. I think he kind of goes in this reluctantly, and then the USS Maine explodes, and there's such a drumbeat for war with the press and yellow journalism, and there's this need for revenge, and he just feels, let's just go along with it, and he has his empire in his hands, doesn't know what to do with it really. There's the ongoing war in the Philippines he has to deal with, and there's all these different things that's happening. His personal life, too, is actually interesting to think about, too. The First Lady is not in very good health. Ida McKinley has a series of strokes. She has what probably was epilepsy, and he has a lot of things to deal with in the White House with her. He covers up her face with a napkin when she has these seizures, and so it's a hard personal life for him to deal with as a president. So he has a lot of stress with the war and with his wife.
Okay, maybe we can look at, like, zoom in now and look at the assassination itself, and then zoom back out again at the minute for the context. So this assassination is attributed to this one man, Leon Czolgosz, who's a kind of an anarchist and a dropout, and not really even liked that much by the wider anarchist community. And he acts as this archetypal lone nut in shooting the president. And I was surprised when I looked at this, just as part of my wider series, I was surprised how little I found contesting that narrative, even amongst people who maybe are a little suspicious. There's no details presented more than that. So your work is one of the first I've come across. It's actually gone into the details of what might have been going on by looking at what people were saying at the time about Czolgosz having support on the day and as part of a wider network. So could you maybe just elaborate on that, about what people perceive happened to the assassination, and then where you found evidence of a deeper story?
Yeah, there's a number of things I can point to. One thing is we can just dismantle this notion that he was some kind of, uneducated lone nut. He was a very intelligent man. He actually went to high school, graduated high school, which was not common at the time. His family actually paid extra money for him to go to high school. He was very literate. So he knew how to read and write very well. He still understood anarchist theory very well, attended their meetings. He was respected in terms of being a member of these groups. And when he was in jail, and the prison warden said he never met a more intelligent prisoner than Leon Czolgosz. He would play kind of games with the guards, play tricks with them. It was interesting to look at his life story. He was not this kind of person that you would think he wasn't deranged. Two psychiatrists studied him to see if they could do this insane defense at the trial. And they said the man is not insane. He knew what he was doing. So that part of the story, we can kind of say he was not a person who just was a crazed assassin. So that's one thing we can say. Now, secondly, I think there's a number of things about the assassination itself that don't make a lot of sense. And I looked at these in the book, and they come down to about three different things. And the first one, the idea of follow the money, where that comes from.
Mm-hmm.
The phrase "follow the money," yeah, it's from Watergate. So it applies to this too, because Czolgosz, he comes to Buffalo in the summer of 1901, and he gets work on a farm in West Seneca. And then at the end of the summer, he runs out of money. He tells the man running the farm he has no more money. He can't pay his rent, and he then disappears somewhere. Don't really know where. Perhaps he goes to Cleveland, it's a guess. And he comes back to Buffalo 3 days later, and he has stacks of $50 bills in his hand. He is paying for his new room and board with 50s, $100 bills. He's paying for the most expensive liquor. He buys the most expensive gun, Iver Johnson revolver. So his family has never seen him. They testify to this later. They haven't seen him in over a year. So the question is, who would be able to give him that much money, especially in 1901? That's a lot of money, and that quickly. So that's, I think, very suspicious that someone knew what they were doing. And I think that is evidence that it was being funded by some very powerful and wealthy people for the assassination, because he was out of work. And I think that is one thing that we can point to, the money trail, the amount of money that he had at that time.
And on the day itself, I was interested to find that you highlight, at the time, people at the scene believed he had an accomplice there who was acting as a distraction almost. Can you comment on that?
Yes, and this really goes into a second point about the photographer too. And I actually found more about this too, about who this person was, just after the book had come out, which points to maybe even a larger conspiracy. And they really go together with the other point about the photographer. So at the crime scene, it's about 4:00 in the afternoon, and McKinley is at the Temple of Music at the Pan American Exposition. This is the culmination of his visit to Buffalo. He's meeting the public inside of the Temple of Music. And he has agents Foster and Ireland stationed next to him of the Secret Service. And they're watching the crowd. And McKinley is greeting the public. And then as the president is being approached by the assassin, who has his Ivory Johnson revolver wrapped up in a rag so it can't be seen, the person in front of Leon Czolgosz does several different things that really points to the fact that he had planned this with him. So first of all, this person in front of Czolgosz is leaning backwards to conceal the gun. So Czolgosz has the gun tucked into the back of this person. So they're walking back to front almost. He has the gun concealed in his back. So this person, as you can picture, he's leaning backwards. Czolgosz is kind of leaning forwards, and the gun is being hidden in the person's back. So that's a very unusual thing, very telling point. Because the Secret Service agent was asked about this in the trial, and they called this man the Italian. And the judge said, "Didn't you see the gun?" And he said, "I was looking, but the person in front of him was leaning backwards. I couldn't see it." And then when this person, the Italian, reaches President McKinley, he does several different things to make it possible for Leon Czolgosz to shoot McKinley. He grabs McKinley and he turns him to the left. So that's one thing. He grabs the president's hand and turns him away to the left a little bit. And then he grabs McKinley's hand and will not let go. He shakes it vigorously and just will not let the president's hand go. And then agents Foster and Ireland start to freak out, and they grab this guy after about maybe 15 seconds of shaking McKinley's hand, take him away from the scene. And then that leaves McKinley open for Czolgosz to step forward and shoot 2 blasts into McKinley's chest after that.
Okay, and
then after this, go ahead. One more point too. Now, if this guy was not part of the plot, he would have probably stayed there and helped McKinley. Anyone would do that, and if you're a decent person. But he's nowhere to be found, because after the president gets shot, Foster and Ireland let this guy go. They go back to McKinley, and the Italian disappears, leaves the Temple of Music. They can't find him. They look for him, but he gets out of there. So it's very strange what this guy did.
Okay, another aspect to explore is McKinley doesn't die straight away. He lives for some days afterwards, and it looks like he's going to recover. But I've heard the surgery attempt, his medical treatment, described as a comedy of errors, where they couldn't find the bullet within him. They needed to remove the lead bullet, and there was an X-ray machine there, but no one knew how to use it. And there happened to be an expert in removing bullets who was a resident of that hospital, but he was out of town. So can you maybe speak to your investigation of the medical treatment of William McKinley?
Oh, yeah. If he was shot today, he would have recovered probably in about a week or two. The first bullet, in fact, bounced off of his chest. It was short of his gunpowder load. So there was only really one bullet that entered him that went through his pancreas and then settled into his liver. It would have been easy extraction. In a modern day, he would have healed probably in about a week or so. But yeah, they took him to the Exposition Hospital, not a local hospital that would have better equipment. And they picked a gynecologist to do the surgery who had no idea what he was doing, Matthew Mann. And there was no lighting. He had to use a mirror to reflect light from the sun to do the surgery. And it was just a horrible operation. And then the the director of the medical part of the exposition, they have different directors that do different things. And one of them was Roosevelt Park. He was medical director of the exposition. But he was not there. He was a very gifted surgeon. He could have probably saved McKinley. He actually performed surgeries like that before. He saved gunshot wound victims. But he was not there. He was in Niagara Falls performing surgery. And I think that's very suspicious that this person who could have saved McKinley, he really should have been there. And I understand why he wasn't. I mean, he could have put off the surgery for another time that the president was visiting town. He really should have. That was his duties. He should have been on the fairgrounds greeting the president. And I find it very suspicious that he was not there, Dr. Roswell Park. But he wasn't. He could have saved McKinley.
Okay. Is there anything more you want to say specifically about the assassination, the day of it, and the surrounding events? That's fine. But
yeah,
what is go on?
There's this, the one really crucial thing I want to add. It's such a key part of the story is that we need to talk about the Charles Dudley Arnold. So this is such a key part of the story too. So he was the photographer, official photographer for the exposition, and he followed McKinley everywhere. He had like an all-access pass, you could call it, and he took pictures inside, outside buildings. He followed McKinley when he was in Niagara Falls when he visited. He was with him at the luncheon, the morning of the assassination. He was like his personal photographer. He went with him everywhere. So he also takes the last picture we have of McKinley when he arrives at the Temple of Music with Secretary Cortelyou and President Milburn of the exposition inside a carriage. McKinley is very happy. He's waving to his photographer. He's right outside the Temple of Music. And this is the key event of the entire exposition. They planned this for months, really, this specific event, meeting the public. But then for some reason, Arnold does not go inside and take pictures of McKinley shaking hands with the public. And it's very suspicious that he did not do that. This was his official duties to do this. But someone told him not to go in there and take photographs of what was happening next. So I think that this really proves that someone knew what was going to happen and did not want photographs of the Italian and the shooting, because they knew in 7 minutes he was going to be shot. The other possibility is he did go in there and the photographs were destroyed. So this is such a key part, that photographs should have been taken. That was his job. This is like the money shot here, shaking hands with the public, being there, but he was not there. And I think that really tells us there was something more going on here. And in fact, I just want to share this other thing I just found out. It's kind of explosive, and it's hard for me to believe this, but hey, I'm just going to go with it. I was signing copies of this book at a book signing. This was about 2 years after the book came out, 2 or 3 years. And then I got approached by this man, and he said that he knew who the Italian was. And I was like, oh, he said, this is amazing. How do you know this? Well, he said, well, this person was a member of my family. This had been talked about and known in my family. We did not talk about this because it was such an explosive thing to know. He said he was a member of the Republican Party. He was like kind of like person that just did work for the Republican Party in Buffalo. So he was like my great-grandfather. In fact, he was Italian. He was like this kind of like an upper politician in Buffalo at the time. So he knew that the person in front of McKinley was a member of, in front of Czolgosz, was a member of the Republican Party. So I'm wondering, does this place the plot, does it move it then to the plot to kill McKinley to install Roosevelt as president, who was a very important figure in New York State politics? Could that be the reason why they killed him?
Okay.
He was very popular in Buffalo. Yeah.
Well, that's a different spin even from what I took majoritively from your book, because I think you have to always peel this back in layers, right? Because the first layer is Leon Czolgosz acted alone. And if you peel behind that, there's this wide amount of anarchist violence going across the Europe and the United States, with assassinations of heads of state and also bombings going on. And I don't know how to put like bookends on this. Would you say from, I don't know, the 1870s through to it doesn't seem to fall away in the 1920s, but it's something I think that people aren't really aware of how extensive that was, and that there was a substantial bombing on Wall Street in 1920 from anarchists. We don't, like, the anarchists were the radical terrorists of their day. Could you maybe describe the scene with anarchists at that time? Right.
So you had this movement that they're trying to use violence for political goals, and they believe that the working class is being disrespected from working conditions in the factories and wages and that were horrible, child labor. And there was so much legitimate criticism of the Industrial Revolution because it was not helping the working class in ways that people may have expected. They were, Carnegie and Rockefeller and Morgan were beyond the wealth any man could have ever imagined in history. And there was this backlash among anarchists. And there was things like the Haymarket Square bombing in Chicago, where police officers were killed. There was a May Day strike, and it went horribly wrong. And it was blamed on anarchists. They did not throw the bomb, and they got executed for this. So there were different things happening at the time that were making it seem like the anarchists were to blame. And sometimes they were not to blame. But it was Charles Strick, for example, Carnegie's second in command. He gets shot in the neck. He survives the assassination attempt by an anarchist. So there's a lot of different things happening that show that the working class is rising up and not liking what's taking place.
Okay, with the Strick shooting, this takes us into McKinley because it's the man that does that is the partner of perhaps the most famous anarchist of the day, Emma Goldman. And
right.
You implicate Goldman and the wider anarchist network in the McKinley assassination through, there's undoubtedly an association with Czolgosz, which Emma Goldman always denies that she had anything to do with the assassination. But later on, there is also a confession, isn't there? So perhaps you could talk about that element of it, please.
Right. So another anarchist that she was associated with, that she lived with for a while in Chicago, it was David Kaplan. And this man later confesses that he was part of this plot to kill McKinley. He was the getaway driver, as he called himself. He was waiting for Czolgosz to leave the scene and help him escape, which never was really a possibility. But they may have told him that just to placate him. But Kaplan says that Czolgosz was part of the plot with Goldman. They planned this out several months ahead of time. They had gone to Buffalo to look at the exposition grounds to see how they could plan this out and who they could use. And that was what he had said was part of this. So it seems like that may have been part of the story. And I sort of wonder, like, at what point would this have become known that they were seeking to kill President McKinley, and who would have got word of this? Because it just seems to me very, very suspicious, the part about the photographer, because someone very important must have told him that he can't go in there for him to listen to that. Someone very higher up. He should have been able to take photographs of the assassination, and only someone of official status that knew the assassination was going to take place. That there's so much unanswered questions about this that just still are haunting me, I guess you could say.
Do you see any evidence of a general infiltration of anarchist movements at the time? I know that Czolgosz was accused of it. There was some publication in a magazine, wasn't there, saying, "Hey, this guy, he's asking too many questions, and he sounds like someone we should be cautious of." So it sounds like there was some infiltration going on by whoever, whether it was the Secret Service or whether this is in a time prior to the existence of anything like the FBI. So do you think that was going on at the time?
I think, looking back at this, it's a little strange. I think this may have happened very quickly because at the time, Czolgosz was known to be a person who was willing to kill President McKinley. It had been published in Anarchist magazine. They said, watch out for this guy. He's not one of us. And just be aware of him to disown him. So if anyone sees this at the time and they say, hey, we can use this guy to take out the president, and he will do it for us.
Right.
And that's the very end of August, and it's published widely. So if you don't like President McKinley, you've got yourself a person that you could hire that'll do the job. And then at that point in time, he disappears, as I said, for about 2 or 3 days, and he comes back to Buffalo loaded with money. And again, do anarchists have that kind of money laying around? But who would have that kind of money that could fund him and kill him through President McKinley? So I think a lot of this stuff happens very fast. think of like there's other times in history, like the mafia was hired by the CIA to do assassinations. So sometimes you have these different groups the government will use as patsies that will take the blame for other things that happen in history. And I think I'm just guessing here, but there's just so much that happened here that just doesn't make any sense to me. Like the photographs missing, the strange behavior of the accomplice, him coming back to Buffalo with all that money. There's just so many things that I think need to be answered before we can say this just was one person that did this.
Okay, I might ask you to speculate a bit now, but in the John F. Kennedy assassination, I know that there's a lot of claims that one consequence of that was a change in policy towards Vietnam. And I know that's contested. Mm-hmm. So like Noam Chomsky, for example, contests that and think, no, the structure of the state just carries on and does what it does, no matter who's in charge. Whereas other researchers like Peter Dale Scott point out, no, there was a definite shift towards Vietnam. So with McKinley crossing over to Roosevelt, I wonder if you see any kind of shift. I mean, I know, for example, that Murray Rothbard writes about McKinley being more allied with the Rockefeller interests, whereas Theodore Roosevelt was more of a J.P. Morgan man. But the big event of the presidency was kind of in the rearview mirror at that point with the war with Spain and the Philippines. And I can't really think of any huge thing that Roosevelt does that would that McKinley wouldn't have done, if you see that he goes on to do. So what do you think do you have any speculation on kind of motive if someone in the, what we might call the deep state, whatever, or the Republican Party structure wanted Roosevelt there instead of McKinley?
Well, I can just speculate about this. So there is, if you go into this a little bit, okay. Roosevelt was in many ways very different than McKinley. He was a progressive. He was from New York State. He was a person who was a trust buster. He was a person in New York City who cleaned up he was police commissioner in New York City. He cleaned up the scandals there. He pointed people that he could trust. When he campaigned for governor, he was supported by Roosevelt Park and other people that funded his campaign. And they put him in the vice presidency just to kind of get rid of him because he was causing so much trouble, the Republican Party, so many changes, that they said just put him there and then he could just sort of be forgotten. It was like this witness protection program almost to get rid of people, and he was there, and it kind of backfired on them because when he became president, he changed a lot of things. He started the trust busting to break up the trusts like Standard Oil and other companies, and he met with strike breakers in the White House. He had a whole new change in policy, and he was from New York State. He was beloved there by the people of the state of New York. So if this was done, it's almost as if it's a way to install one of their leaders as president on their home turf. You have Buffalo, a very important city at the time, very wealthy city, very powerful city, to help them become governor. So this could have been a way for them to install their man as president. Very much like Dallas was a perfect place to kill President Kennedy because they had all the people there that they could use and trust and do the assassination there. And the places where assassinations take place are very important in retrospect because it helps us understand the plot in many ways.
Right. I'm just reflecting also that Roosevelt is kind of used in 1912 to, I mean, I don't know if you could call it a coup, but to ensure that William Howard Taft doesn't get in and Woodrow Wilson does then, and Roosevelt comes back with this Bull Moose Party, this very radical agenda for redefining the United States at that point, and not dissimilar from what Woodrow Wilson goes on to do.
Oh yeah, that's a great point, because then it splits the Republican ticket and it guarantees that Wilson gets elected president. That might even happen this year. When next year, I guess it would be. Not next year. Yeah, close to it. 2024. Think about if Trump does not get the nomination, if say like DeSantis does, then he could run as like a third party, and it could be like a split in their ticket. If he doesn't get the nomination, that could happen too.
Yeah, I was just saying that to a friend of mine, that he might have a rerun of the Bull Moose Party in 2024 with Donald Trump at the helm. It's this big bombastic personality that has the
that could happen
potential to do it, because that was the last time a third party came in second in US elections, in 1912. Last time that kind of really significant impact.
like a former Republican president that tries to get back in, and then it would split the Republican ticket, and and it could happen again where it could guarantee a Democratic win. So it could do the same thing like in 1912. Yeah, it just could happen again.
Okay, so I'll say if there's anything else you want to say on the kind of narrative of this, then please do. And otherwise, I'll just finish off with a question that the second half of the book is based around I suppose, the other aspect of your life, which is in addition to your historical work, you do like paranormal ghost walks, and you've written about some of the unusual, unexpected events associated with sites of assassination, and particularly the McKinley assassination. So I think maybe whenever there's anything else you want to say about the narrative, and then it's good maybe to finish off on that, just to entice people as to what else is in the book, and that you actively do this kind of thing. If anyone's in your geographical area, this is something you do around the Buffalo area.
Yes, I actually do paranormal walks, and they do them in like Lockport and Hamburg and Buffalo. And a lot of the things in the second half of the book, they just talk about some like unusual things, paranormal things connected to the assassination. And one thing is just when McKinley visits and he does like a tour of the area, one thing that he does is he visits something called the Devil's Hole the day before the assassination. It's near Niagara Falls, and it's associated with a lot of unusual train accidents and massacres, Native American massacres, and he visits this place just before the assassination. It's almost like a very cursed area. Many people have fallen in the gorge and died there, even just recently. So that's one thing that I'm kind of exploring in the book, the timeline before he shows up. And then even like the place where he ends up dying, President Milborn's house, that site was notoriously sort of haunted, and it got torn down in 1956. So there's a number of different places like around the area that were connected to the assassination, just kind of exploring. And the idea of President McKinley just sort of has always haunted our city, and just the kind of the regret that it happened on our watch. It just has always been kind of this thing we've talked and been sad about for just such a long time, and it sort of hung over our city like a curse almost for so many years.
On that, yes, it's a good note to perhaps end it on. Is there anything else you'd like to say on this topic?
Maybe just one more thing. I was just thinking, like, one unusual thing that takes place too is after Czolgosz is arrested, he's taken to Buffalo Police Headquarters, and he's interrogated for 7 hours, and there's no record of what happened during that interview. And it's very similar to like what happened with Lee Harvey Oswald, where he was interrogated and they destroyed the evidence for what he said too. And then after he's interrogated, this confession shows up that we find out later he never even wrote. He was forced to sign. It's not even his own handwriting. So it's very strange, like what happened during that time? Was he tortured into saying that he was only doing this by himself? So one more thing that we can mention too is what happened at police headquarters where they interrogated him, and this strange confession shows up that he was forced to sign. And there's no notes of what happened during that time when he was being interviewed by the Buffalo police. And it's similar to what happened with Oswald. So just there's so many things about this assassination that just I don't understand and don't have the answers, but they really do raise a lot of questions, I think.
Yeah, well, I think the book is amazing. As I say, it's one of the only resources I've come across that has raised these questions. I think everyone knows these questions exist, but no one knows how to begin asking them. So I'd certainly highly recommend the book for that reason. I'll link to it, the details of it, and your other work. So maybe just give its name and mention the other books you've produced on, what is it, JFK, Malcolm X, and on JFK's son as well, haven't you? The death of JFK's son.
Yes. So this one is called The Secret Plot to Kill McKinley. It's available at buffalobooks.com. And then the other ones I've written is Why the CIA Killed JFK and Malcolm X, The Secret Drug Trade in Laos. And then the other one about JFK Jr. was Exploding the Truth, the JFK Jr. assassination. And that's a great book too. There's a lot of evidence in there about why he was. That was not an accident. It was anything but.
Yeah, I haven't read it yet. I've just heard your interview. It was on the Conspiracy Unlimited podcast, and it happened from 4 years ago. I'll link to that too, actually. But it just happened to pop up from 4 years ago, just on my playlist. I don't know why. So that was very fortuitous because I listened in and found out about this work.
Thanks, Richard. I appreciate that.
Okay, Professor Koerner, thank you very much indeed, and love to have you on again to talk about some of that other work.
Oh, wonderful. It's been such a pleasure. I really appreciate this, and thank you for the interview.
Thank you.